On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use, welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 33, created on December 14th, 2022. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me are Jeff in Minnesota and Neil out on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, everyone. I am going with a beer for the season, and I am having an Imprint beer company, Filthy Animal.
Wow.
It is a triple IPA.
Ooh, and very hazy at that. So I'm going with one of my favorite breweries, Founders, and this is a special one, a French toast bastard. So they have a backwoods bastard. So this is a French toast bastard with vanilla, cinnamon, and maple bourbon barrel aged Scotch ale. Tis to see that.
All right. And I'm having a Di Serono on the rocks, only because I had to kill the bottle in hopes that someone buys me a fresh one for Christmas. Hint, hint to all of our wonderful fans out there. All right, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. And now just the audio is available on Spotify and Anchor by searching for Green Bay Chat. Well, we've had the bye week, and that's what we're going to talk about. Just a week off. We do have some NFC North and playoff possibilities to kick around. We do have our Packer Player of the Past this week, as well as a preview of the big Monday Night Football matchup. And our Packer History Report will be coming around the corner as well. But as for this week, you guys, the Packers have had their bye week. It is a very late week 14, and it has allowed them to get tan, rested, and ready for the final stretch of the season here. Now, theoretically, they have a shot at the playoffs by running the table. And that would, in closing out, it really would be closing out with a 5-game winning streak when you include that win against Chicago, right? However, Jeff, what do you think? Is it too little too late for this season?
I think we'll know after Monday night.
Okay.
If the Packers come out and they shit the bed Monday night against a warm weather team at home, you know, it's going to be cold. May not be snowy, but it's going to be cold as hell, which is good. And I think if they come out and they shit the bed, I think the season's done. I mean, obviously they wouldn't run the table at that point. I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, because there's some really awful teams in the NFC that are still like in the playoff hunt.
You've noticed?
I don't need.
Okay.
Neil's going to talk about that, but I mean, you know, some of these teams peaked really early. Now, we talked about this very early on with the Packers bye not coming after that trip to London.
Right.
So they had the right of first refusal. So the Packers said, we're gonna keep going. So if they don't win out, and I would say if they don't make the playoffs, then I think that's going to be one of the biggest decisions that were made preseason that affected the whole season. Now, I'm not saying that, they would have miraculously won all these games and the asshats and a lot of these other things would have been fixed, but you just wonder those middle section games that they lost. And we talked about this too. Was it a fatigue situation? It sure seemed to be. Just they were off. Was it fatigue? Was it injury? Was it a combination thereof? We'll never necessarily know. We can ponder that, but it'll be really interesting to see if they come out after the bye week fresh, they don't suck, and if they run the table, could get interesting.
Well, my opinion there, Jeff, really is that the trip to London only affects the Jets game. I think that, first of all, the game in London against the Giants, dumb loss there. Then you've got, in addition to that, the Washington game and the Detroit game. That's 3 losses right there that should have been wins based on really how the season looked, how these teams look, and we consider, okay, where are we against the average? What are the expectations of this team? So you change those 3 wins out, things are looking a little bit differently. But when the season's over, though, you're right. People want to pin the downfall of the team or the failure of the team. They're going to want to pin it on something. And I think that's what's going to get the blame, is not taking the bye earlier in the season.
So I have 2 opinions on this. One is that I think it affected more than the Jets game, and it's partly because of the young receivers core and the fact that they would have had additional time to gel such that all of them sort of playing at a higher level would have happened earlier. So just take Christian Watson. We have one better week of Christian Watson rather than him being injured. But there is also we've got to figure out what the hell is going on, right? So when a team starts out poorly, right, you've got this vicious circle that's going on, and that vicious circle isn't helped by the fact that you have no break to sort of try to turn yourself around. And you look specifically at Matt LaFleur's record coming off the bye, something that hopefully is going to help us this week. And I think that there's a significant chance that it's not just that one game, but it's possibly two or even all three of those games. But the fact of the matter is if we were one game better off right now, we'd be thinking a whole lot differently about this season and where we possibly could be.
To roll out the end of the season, though, there's a lot of help that needs to happen, not even looking at the division leaders right now, but just what Green Bay has to do. Like we said, they have to win 4 in a row. The most important game is always the next game. So Monday night with the Rams, who have been struggling as well. Coming in. Let's talk about that for a second. Remember last season, we had high hopes. We were expecting to be a Super Bowl team. And think about this, everything that's been said about the Rams this season, as far as floundering after a Super Bowl win, terrible record and just futility across the board. If Green Bay had gotten to the Super Bowl and had won and had the same season they're having this year, we'd be getting all that said about us. I mean, they'd be looking at saying, wow, you guys won the Super Bowl, and now look at this shitty season you're having, barely making it to 5-8. And I don't know that I would want that stigma on a post Super Bowl win like the way the Rams have it.
I don't think they care in the end. They won a fucking Super Bowl. That's what matters the most. So
I concur with Neil.
So going into where our playoff possibilities are, obviously we can't win the division. There are 3 wild cards, and Dallas is already 10-3. So even though we in theory have a tiebreaker against Dallas, if you can't tie them, there is no such thing as a tiebreaker. So just going into the games, the Packers have less, the Rams Monday Night Football at Miami, which looked a lot worse earlier than the season does now. And there might be a cold snap going through the entire country over Christmas Day. So we might get a cold weather game against Miami. Obviously, Vikings and the Lions.
Cold weather. It'll be like, what, 40?
That does not give the Dolphins an advantage that it might otherwise give them if it were, say, hot. So we've got a couple of things going in our favor for that. So Dallas is already ahead of us as far as the wild card. So we can only allow one other team besides Dallas to finish ahead of us. So who are the teams that are in contention? I'm going to completely ignore the NFC South because that is an absolute clusterfuck. One of those teams will make the playoffs. There is no way that there are 2 teams running the table in that South, which is what would have to happen to move past us. So just starting out with the Packers. The Packers are 5-8. They would move to 9-8. We are currently 4-5. In our conference record, we would move to 7-5. And that's the key element, is that we would be 7-5 in conference record. And we'd be 4-2 in our division record. So Seattle is 7-6. They are 5-5 in their conference record. So we need Seattle to go 2-2. And the reason why we need them to go 2-2 is because they're going to fall behind us as far as conference record is concerned. They play this Thursday, the 49ers, on Thursday Night Football. That's a huge game. Thankfully, San Francisco is still looking good despite every quarterback that they've ever had seemingly going down to injury. They then play at Kansas City the following week and finish with home games against the Jets and the Rams. And so we could be in a situation 2 weeks from now where Seattle is essentially knocked out if we do our part as far as running the table is concerned. Obviously, we won't know that part yet.
I can see Seattle taking a 3-game losing streak there because that's 3 tough games, and with teams that still want to jockey for position in the playoffs. You know, that last game of the year, so much depends on who's going to play. But yeah, for Seattle to drop 3 in a row is a real possibility right now.
Okay, next team, Detroit. So Detroit is 6-7. They're ahead of us. So in theory, they could finish 10-7. They are also 5-4 in the conference. But if we end up tied with Detroit, it goes to division tiebreaker. So Detroit has at the Jets, at the Panthers, Bears at home, and at Green Bay. So the Jets are going to play a big role as far as whether we have the chance to do it. John, I know you have an opinion on where this is going to end up.
I can see Detroit going 2-1, and Green Bay getting, if Green Bay gets 3 in a row here, Detroit and Green Bay with 8-8 records going into week 18. And that game for the team that, the team that wins becomes a 9-8 team and gets that last playoff spot. Hey, they need someone to play on Sunday night on January 8th. And I like the way this script looks, Neil. I think that this one's getting written.
All right. The other two, so, based on that analysis, there at least are reasonable pathways by which we could go ahead of both Seattle and Detroit. The ones that are more complicated are Washington and the Giants. And there are two reasons for that. One, that we've lost to both of them. And so we would lose a head-to-head tiebreaker, but they tied each other. And so we're not likely to come to a tiebreaker. But Washington is 7-5-1. The Giants are 7-5-1. And so we need to have a situation, assuming that Seattle and Detroit move in our direction and we do what we need to do, we need one of those two teams to finish 1-3. And we would actually need both of them to finish 1-3 if one of the Seattle or Detroit did not go our way. So Washington plays the Giants this week. So that's obviously a big game. One of those two teams is going to get a loss unless they both decide to shit the bed and get another tie.
Again.
But one of those teams is going to lose. So Washington plays Giants at home, at the 49ers, Browns at home, and then Cowboys in a situation where Cowboys are going to be jockeying, hopefully for position to win the NFC East. That's the best case scenario, and rather than that they're locked into the number 5 position, that are locked into the number 1 wild card. That I would say is the disaster situation. But in theory, all 4 tough games as far as Washington is concerned. There's certainly a route to 1-3 for that. The Giants at Washington, at the Vikings. This would be a disaster if we have to rely on the Vikings as far as whether we make the playoffs or not. Sure. They play the Colts at home and then at the Eagles. Now, I will say, as far as the Giants are concerned, when they were 7-2, I noted to you guys that I thought they were the team that was at least had the possibility of going all the way to 7-10, and they're not going to go quite that far, but I could easily see the Giants losing all 4 of those games.
You got to believe that Philadelphia probably isn't going to be playing anybody in week 18. Philadelphia is most likely going to have that number 1 seed wrapped up. So I think that you could get the Giants a win there. And then throwing the Colts in there as well. See, I think the Giants have a better chance of not losing 3 games than Washington does. So I think I'm rooting for the Giants this week, and then for Washington to lose 2 more games out of their remaining 3. Same thing. I feel like Dallas is going to have that 5 spot locked up. They may not play a lot of starters as well in week 18. So the most likely scenario for us to help us is Washington losing their next 3 games in a row.
There is one rubber factor that is involved there, and that is the Cowboys and the Eagles still play each other one more time. And if the Cowboys can beat the Eagles, that could bring the final week 18 into play for both teams as far as winning the division and being a 1 seed versus being a wild card and being the 5 seed.
For as analytical as you are, Neil, and as much as you love statistics and scenarios, please tell me you wrote something up on A, the likelihood of Washington and New York tying again this week, and B, what that means for the last 4 games.
I did not, but what it fundamentally means if they were to tie, inexplicably, if they were to tie again, is that we would really need to be in a 3-team scenario as far as the tiebreaker. So conference record becomes the determining factor in the tiebreaker, and it does not come down to head-to-head, because head-to-head against those 2 teams is the disaster situation. So we
lost to both of them. Yeah.
All right. We don't want to get into too much talking about how a tie is a half a win and what 2 ties would do for you down the road. If the scenario happens, we will devote a full section to it next week. Okay. But for right now.
And that's a Sunday night game, as I recall.
Yeah,
yes.
Like I said, I'm rooting for the Giants in that one, rooting for the Commanders to lose 3 in a row. While Green Bay had the week off, there was a big game, or a game, I should say, with big implications in the NFC North. Jeff, over in your neck, well, it wasn't your neck of the woods, but it really affected the folks over there, right? Between Minnesota and Detroit. Detroit walking away with a win and keeping Minnesota from clinching the NFC North for 1 more week, in that Detroit, in theory, can get the same number of wins as Minnesota right now. How are the locals handling this, Jeff?
You know, I think DEFCON's kind of moving up here. I tell you what, they did not look good. I know we've joked about this. I know a few weeks back, after the Vikings lost to the Cowboys, they had a negative point differential, and then they won last week or the prior week, and then they played Detroit again. And this is a 10-3 team, right? 10 wins, 3 losses. They have a negative point differential. Now, it's not a big one, but it's -1. Okay. So if you look at the other very successful teams this year, that being Philadelphia, They're at plus 138. You've got the Buffalo Bills at a plus 132. You've got those Dallas Cowboys at plus 131 and the Kansas City Chiefs at 86 and the Vikings at -1. I mean, how does this happen? It's just
one of those things is not like the others. One of these things just doesn't belong.
You know, we always say that the most important statistic is the win column. That's the only one that
Right.
really matters. But those 5 teams have 10 wins,
Yep.
and Minnesota with a -1. Yeah, okay, so it's only 1 point, but it's still a negative in your point differential. It's just crazy how you talk about this team in their one possession games or one score games and how their season could be completely the opposite right now. And these statistics say more than what's really going on with that 10-3 record. Neil, I'm going to let you talk about DVOA because you understand this stuff better than I do, but it's not good.
DVOA, right? It's just an overall metric of how well a team has performed. It takes into account the opponents. It takes into account context. And so by DVOA, the Lions are 11th in the NFL. They're an above average team. The Packers are 15th in the NFL by DVOA. The Vikings are 21st in the NFL by DVOA, and they lead the division by 4 games. It's almost inconceivable how lucky they've gotten to get where they are.
Head scratcher.
So the most important statistic, though, again, is the win column. That's what's going to play out on Saturday. The Vikings host the Colts, and on Sunday, the Lions are heading to New York to play the Jets. So the Lions really still fighting for that NFC North spot. Maybe they can get there. I don't have a lot of faith in the Colts, so I think the Vikings are going to get their needed win to take the division. And Jeff, that'll probably, project them to the Super Bowl again, or at least that'll be the equivalent to them winning the Super Bowl this week, correct?
It's been a while since they've won the division. Not obviously as long as the Lions, but nonetheless, it's been a while here in Minnesota. I've said this before almost every week. The ball is bouncing their way. They're getting the lucky breaks. Could this be their year?
No.
I don't think so either. But I mean, because they're just when they lose really ugly. And I think that's, as you're ramping
they win
up,
ugly too, Jeff.
Well, fair enough. Okay. But I mean, I don't think this is sustainable. I mean, so the offense is passable. Kirk Cousins and such, obviously Jefferson, he set a franchise record last week, but they still lost. Cousins had over 400 yards passing, but oh, by the way, the defense gave up, I think, the 5th game in a row, well over 400 yards of offense. So that's not going to work in the playoffs.
There's also the only statistic that matters is wins or losses, but the other statistics give you a better handle on what's going to happen in the future. And so I always like Bill Barnwell's column at the beginning of every season where he talks about which teams are likely to progress, which teams are most likely to regress in the season. And the number one statistic that determines likelihood of regression is record in 1-score games. If you are way above 500 in 1-score games, you're almost certainly going to regress the following year.
And again, we get to wait and see. So we'll talk about those 2 games as well as the Packer game next week when we come back. But as far as the season goes, we have a lot to cheer about, win or lose over the next 4 games. We've got a rookie who has come alive. Christian Watson, we gushed about him last week as much as we could. We alluded to the fact that he has 9 touchdowns on his rookie season. He is establishing his name in the annals of the Packer Media Guide for rookie seasons. And he, I think, hopefully has his eyes on that number 13 and a cat named Billy Howton. Billy Howton, as a rookie, had 13 touchdowns for the Green Bay Packers. And Neil, sounds like he is our Packer player of the past.
So this week's Packers player of the past is Billy Howton. Billy Howton is a native of Texas, coming from Plainview, Texas. He was a 3-sport athlete in high school, and then went on to Rice University, or what was then known as Rice Institute, for his college, starting in 1948. At Rice, he both played football and ran the low hurdles and high hurdles. He was known as the Red Fox for his sneakiness as far as all of his routes were concerned. He was part of the most historic Rice University football team. In 1949, Rice went 10-1 and won the Cotton Bowl over University of North Carolina finishing number 5 in the country, the highest ranking Rice ever achieved in football. As a result of Rice finishing number 5, they decided that a school of 2,000 students needed a 70,000 seat football stadium, which relates to why Super Bowl IV was played at Rice University. Did not work out quite so well as far as that's concerned. So he was a sophomore on that 1949 team. In 1950 and in 1951, he was all Southwest Conference. In 1951, he was the Southwest Conference MVP and an All-American. And in one game against SMU, who had just beaten Notre Dame the week before, he had 3 touchdowns in a 28-7 win over SMU. He set a season record for 22.6 yards per catch in his final year at Rice. Obviously had an extremely good end of his time at Rice and played for a national powerhouse at the time. The Packers drafted him in the 2nd round in 1952 as the 15th overall pick. And at the Green Bay Packers, he rejoined his Rice quarterback, Tobin Rote. So you had a Rice quarterback and a Rice wide receiver on those 1950s Packers teams. And I think we're getting into the foreshadowing of where maybe there were a few problems here. The 1952 Packers season by Billy Howton is one of the greatest seasons ever by a rookie wide receiver, or indeed possibly by any wide receiver at any point. He had 53 receptions for 1,231 yards and 13 receiving touchdowns. He had a 23.2 yard per catch in that year. That 1,231 yards, I will remind you, was in 12 games. Second in receiving yards that year was Bud Grant, 234 yards less than what Billy Howton had. That statistics from 1952 would translate in a 16-game season to 1,641 yards and 17 touchdowns. There's only been one rookie wide receiver who has gone more yards than that per game, and that was Bill Gorman in 1960. That record of 13 touchdowns as a rookie stood as the NFL rookie record until 1965 when he was passed by Hall of Famer Gale Sayers. It stood as the receiving rookie touchdown record until 1998 when Randy Moss had 17 touchdowns. It's truly one of the greatest seasons for a rookie wide receiver. And if you look at all-time touchdowns as rookies, he's still second for receiving touchdowns. Moss has 17, Jamar Chase has 13, Billy Howton had 13. Billy Howton again did that in a 12-game season. The Billy Howton record stood as the record for rookie wide receivers for 46 years. And only one rookie wide receiver has had more yards per game. It's just astounding. Unfortunately, what was not astounding was the Packers that year. They were 6-6, but Billy Howton did have a touchdown in that first game that he played against the Bears. Unfortunately, that 1952 season was the part of a down period for the Packers, as we're all well aware. In 1953, the Packers were 2-9-1. The team only had 9 passing touchdowns on the entire year. 1954, Packers were 4-8. The team only had 14 receiving touchdowns on the year. 1955, they at least made it to 6-6. The team had 17 passing touchdowns. 1956, Packers were only 4-8, but Billy Howton had 1,188 yards and 12 touchdowns, 99 yards per attempt, was first team All-Pro, and led the league in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. And in 1957, the team also only had 12 receiving touchdowns, but Billy Howton was also first team All-Pro. So in that period, from 1952 to 1956, Billy Howton was the top Packers receiver every single one of those years with a series of different All-Pros. There were 2 other things that he accomplished that are unique as far as Packers history is concerned. In his rookie year, he had a game in which he had 200 yards receiving against the Los Angeles Rams. And in 1956, he set the Packers record for most receiving yards in a game with 257 yards, also against the Los Angeles Rams, had 2 touchdowns in those games. So he's somebody who obviously had a really stretch as a great player on a teams that were decidedly mediocre in that period. And the bottom of that mediocre nature was in 1958 when the Packers went famously 1-10-1. Now, one thing noteworthy happened during that 57 season that, as we're all aware, is the first year of Lambeau Field. The first touchdown in Lambeau Field was a pass to Billy Howton.
Remember, though, Neil, it was New City Stadium at the time. And we get a little bragging rights because a lot of those Billy Howton records prior to that at Old City Stadium on our field at Green Bay East High School. That's, and the thing with Packers trivia is, if you want to get in deep into playing Packers trivia with people, you grab those teams from the 50s and they're forgotten years because between the three head coaches, there's three head coaches between Curly Lambeau and Vince Lombardi. That right there is a trivia question in itself. Who are those three? Gene Ronzani, Lyle Blackburn, and Ray Scooter McLean. Scooter McLean being the one who had that one win season. Between the three of them, 32, 72, and 2 is the Packers record from 1950 through 1958.
Ouch.
So yeah, and that's what Lombardi had to come into to follow. So not only does Billy Howton have these great numbers, but he does so on miserable teams that are poorly coached. But not for a lack of talent on these teams, because one of these times our Packer of the past is going to be Jack Venisi, and we've got to talk about how these teams were drafted in the 50s that eventually became the Lombardi teams, and so when you throw out a trivia question like, well, who's the Packers rookie, touchdown leader with 13? Billy Howton. Nobody remembers Billy Howton, partly because he's not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The other, you guys know my favorite, Bobby Dillon. Same thing in those years. Dillon playing on the deep. Neil smiling because I got my Bobby Dillon in this week.
Yep.
And same thing, Bobby Dillon, 52 interceptions in 96 games, and they won like 25 games altogether in
Yeah.
that time period, in that 96 games. So yeah, there's a lot of great trivia when you dig into it in those 50s teams, but why they were so bad, that's a thesis paper in itself, Neil.
Indeed, indeed. So going back to Billy Howton and his other things that he was doing during those Packers years, there was definitely an upwelling among players as far as just sort of their salary and their conditions of work. And so the NFL Players Association was founded in 1956. And the initial demands for the Players Association was that when they had 2-day practices, that they get clean socks, clean towels, and clean jocks. So the joke is that the NFLPA was created for socks and jocks. Billy Howton was a leader right from the beginning. I went to Rice, I must be smart. And so he was a leader from the beginning of the NFL Players Association. He was the Packers representative. And in 1958, he was the first president of the NFL Players Association and remained as president of the NFL Players Association until 1961. And one of the most significant things, going beyond merely socks and jocks, that the NFL Players Association did is in 1959, they demanded with an ultimatum that there be pensions for the players. 1959 being a year that was very consequential in the Packers' history and in Billy Howton's life, because Vince Lombardi was the new coach. And Vince Lombardi, as we all know, wanted to be in control. You've got a rabble-rouser that's on this team, somebody who could take the spotlight away from what Vince wanted to accomplish. Billy Howton was traded to the Browns soon after Vince Lombardi was hired. He was traded for Bill Quinlan and Lou Carpenter. Now, some people said, well, Billy Howton was more of a receiver. He didn't block very well. And obviously Lombardi would want something like that. But I think, as is the case with a lot of Vince Lombardi things, there probably are several things going on, but you can see how this would be a threat to his leadership in charge of the Packers.
You got to really dig deep in Packer trivia to know a lot about, Quinlan and Carpenter. Quinlan is a guy who, going back to our salute to service a few weeks ago, he served in the U.S. Army in 1956 before getting back into football. By 1962, he was out of Green Bay. Carpenter by 63 was out of Green Bay. But I think Lou Carpenter is a guy in the backfield, a running back that's really credited with those early 60s championships for the Lombardi teams. Again, probably another player that we can talk about somewhere down the road.
Right. So the Packers certainly got useful pieces for Billy Howton, but his career was certainly not done at that point. So in 1959, he was the top Browns wide receiver on a Paul Brown coach team. And he also had his only year with a winning record. The Browns were 7-5 in that year. At the end of the 1959 season, Billy Howton thought about retirement. The Cowboys offered to trade for him with the draft pick, and he wanted to move back to his native Texas. And so he went to Dallas and spent the last 4 years of his career in Dallas. 1960 Dallas Cowboys, he was the top wide receiver on the Cowboys team that was 0-11-1. So he managed to do worse than that 1958 Packers. But in that one tie, Billy Howton scored the final touchdown of the game, which went from it being down 31-24 to tied 31-30. So the first tie in Cowboys history, credit goes to Billy Howton for that game-tying touchdown. In 1961, the Cowboys finally won their first game. And also Billy Howton had a touchdown reception in that first Cowboys win. He had 706 yards receiving in 1962. 1963 also had a productive season. And so had 4 productive seasons with the Cowboys leading receiver for that team in 2 of those 4 years on teams that had pretty strong offenses. So where does that leave us as far as Billy Howton? Obviously, has accomplishments on the field and off the field, just with the Packers, 303 receptions, 5,581 yards. If you look at receiving yards per game among all Packers receivers all time, Sterling Sharpe is our leader at 72.6, James Lofton, 71, Devontae Adams, 70. Billy Howton is 4th at 69.8 yards per game. Even now, he's 4th in yards per game among all Packers receivers, even ahead of Don Hutson. If you consider his seasons with the Packers and his yards over that time, it would be equivalent to averaging 1,116 yards for each of those seasons in a 16-game season, 8.6 touchdowns per game average if extrapolated to a 16-game season. He was really good for a long time on those terrible Packers years, and he also averaged 18.4 yards per catch during that time. He has the current Packers record for rookie touchdowns at 13, rookie receiving yards at 1,231, and most receiving yards in a game at 257. So, we're talking about 65 years after he left the Packers. He still has 3 Packers receiving records on Packers teams that have had some pretty damn good receivers over the years. As far as the NFL is concerned, at his retirement, his 503 receptions and 8,459 yards were the NFL all-time records. He passed both of the Don Hutson NFL records in receptions and in receiving yards at the time of his retirement. So he was the best as far as those counting stats are concerned. He's certainly hurt by the fact that he played on some really terrible teams, and that hurt his recognition as far as, the all pros and all of the like. But
not even on the all-decade team for the 50s.
No, he's not. And, if you look at the statistics of other receivers, it's difficult to understand why that would be, other than they came down to a decision of wins versus losses. He was passed in the mid to late 60s by Raymond Berry in both the catches and the yards, but nonetheless, he had that record for a while. And Raymond Berry has specifically said that it's a crime that Billy Howton is not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Billy Howton is in the Rice Athletics Hall of Fame as of 1971. He's been in the Packers Hall of Fame since 1974. Billy Howton should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
We're going to have to do what I did with Bobby Dillon. We're just going to get a 86 with Howton put on the back of it and just start wearing it, and hopefully that'll get some good mojo going and get the veterans or the senior committee to take a look at his numbers again.
And unfortunately, Billy Howton hasn't even been a finalist for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So true oversight here.
All right. Well, we're going to have to figure out if we know somebody and start making some phone calls, right? Well, we're going to get the power of the podcast out there for Billy Howton. With that, we've been talking about the bye week, and the bye week, it's a little bit longer this time. It's like, hey, we're waiting for the Packers to get back on the field. Well, we get to wait a little bit longer, and it's going to be Monday night in a very cold Green Bay Monday night when the 4-9 Los Angeles Rams come into town to play the 5-8 Green Bay Packers. Something interesting about this one, I want to jump in. I know you guys have some preview on here, but this is for the gambling degenerates. All right. There has to be a system play, because last year on December 25th, the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns was Baker Mayfield, a game the Packers won 24-22. Less than a year later, Mayfield is returning to Green Bay as the starter for a completely different team, but he had another team in between that. So the rarity of something like that happening is astronomical as well. But Mayfield in that game last year threw 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. It was a game where Green Bay very handily controlled the first half, but looked like they were going to play the we just don't care defense and nearly let Cleveland back into that game. But these are not the Cleveland Browns. These are the Los Angeles Rams, the Rams who were in Cleveland at one time. Add that to your system play as well. But Monday Night Football, what are we looking at?
So first of all, John, what do the odds makers say? Who's
Oh,
favorites
that's
and
right.
by
I'm
how
sorry.
much?
Green Bay is favored by 7 right now. So we got
Really?
Green Bay -7, the over under at a paltry 39.5. I think they're expecting the weather to keep this a low scoring affair.
I don't think it's going to be a low scoring affair. I'm thinking that Baker Mayfield. Did either one of you watch the game where he
Yes.
came in last week? It's
Yes.
like they were gushing on Thursday night, and I'm like, at first I was like, okay, fine, okay. But as the game wore on, and then full disclosure, I fell asleep. So the
And then you
game
woke up
ended,
and
and
said,
I'm
what the
like,
hell is going
shit.
on?
So I had
Yeah.
to rewind, right? And I'm like, oh my god, they won. So I had to rewind I'm like,
Oh, it was really
rewind it
just the last
back, and I
three and a
was
half
like,
minutes of the game, really.
yeah, no, I fell asleep at like the the psychological. So I rewound it, and I was like, holy shit! I mean, it was just everything aligned, for
Mhm.
him to. It kind of begs the question, right? So Baker's, got cast off from the Browns, cast off from the freaking Panthers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. And then he steps in Los Angeles and is like, ah. So after like 2 days, so
Right.
so I'm wondering. So I was thinking to myself, is it? And this kind of came up too on the telecast, that maybe Baker Mayfield just shouldn't think when he's the quarterback, right? I mean, he didn't know shit, right? I mean, how could he, right? I mean, he's been there 2 days. No, whatever familiarity, whatever you have, I don't care. It's just, but at the end of the day, it was just take the snap, throw the ball, or hand it off, and it worked for him. He wasn't thinking, so it
Just
creates
playing off
kind of a
instinct. Yeah.
funky situation here.
Well,
Yeah.
playing off instinct worked for Brett Favre for 18 years. You don't have to think too much, right?
Baker Mayfield is not Brett Favre. Come on, come on.
So two caveats to this. First of all, they're playing the Raiders, who are a complete dumpster fire of a team. So let's not give them too much credit for doing that against the Raiders. Secondly, Baker Mayfield's stats, he was only 22 of 35, 230 yards, only 6.6 yards per attempt. So it's not like he was lighting the world on fire.
Right.
He played competently as a quarterback.
But it
And
was
that
a
he wasn't the starter, Neil.
98-yard drive at the end of the game in 2
Yeah.
minutes. So I'm like, that's
But those numbers are not as the starting quarterback either. He came in
well,
to that game.
basically after one
Well,
series. I mean,
either
come on.
way.
Yeah, that's splitting hairs. I mean, the guy handed off 3 times. I mean, come on. It was one series. It wasn't like he came in at halftime
Right.
and those were his stats. And there were
Still
some
counts.
gaffes. There was some, definitely where, he turned and the guy wasn't there, he turned the wrong way. Fine. But it was, so I don't know. I mean, if he threw 4 picks last year, he can certainly do the same this year. I wish he would. I'm not super concerned, but I think it adds kind of a level of intrigue to the game.
I think a lot of intrigue, and you go back to now, it was a cold night in Los Angeles in their covered stadium with the windows open. For them, it was cold, but it's going to be bitter on Monday. The daytime high right now for Monday is projected to be 16 degrees in Green Bay. This is a night game. So you're looking at temperatures getting down potentially to single digits by the end of the game. I didn't catch what kind of wind chill we're going to have, but it could be a miserable Monday night temperature wise on that field.
Good. Let Troy Aikman freeze his tuchus.
Well, I remember that Packers 49ers game that was so cold a number of years ago. One of my favorite signs from that game was negative 55 degrees. At least I don't have to listen to Troy and Buck.
Well, unfortunately, we will have to listen to him this Monday night.
I don't have to. I'm going to be at the game. So,
well, okay, fair enough.
So going into this Rams team, so they're obviously the most embarrassing Super Bowl defense ever, considering a team that didn't have like retirements of their entire team. Their point differential, negative 78 so far this year. Their offense by yards per play is 31st in the NFL. And their defense is only modestly better. Their key statistic as far as defense is concerned is their running defense is 5th in yards per game. So that is the one thing that they are good at. But fundamentally, they only have 13 touchdown passes on the year. The rushing is only 3.7 yards per attempt. So this is a team that has been bad essentially in all phases of the game. And that's borne out by DVOA. They're 27th overall DVOA, 26th offensively DVOA, 14th defensively, 22nd special teams. Packers is still, by the way, 30th in special teams DVOA. So
Jeez.
they've got an advantage over the asshats. DVOA, they actually are somewhat better on defense as well. But this is a team that lacks superlatives for sure. And given the elements of the weather, the fact that we're home, the fact that we have something to play for where they really don't, other than maybe Baker Mayfield playing for a next contract, I think that the signs point in the direction of a Packers victory.
Well, not only that, but we're coming off a bye. Again, as we referenced before, that Matt LaFleur historically, well, over the course of the last few years, has been quite good. So we should expect, a crisp team with the weather being crisp as well. I think a caveat to that Ram defense, there's a guy by the name of Aaron Donald not playing, right? So, I mean, I don't know how good that run defense really is. Obviously, with a colder, you'd expect more running. And I think, again, with our that 1-2 punch and a run game has been successful when they actually stick to it. This is probably going to be one of those situations, and then sick Christian Watson on him, let him, whether it's, handing him the ball or just getting him open, So what's the over under on Christian Watson touchdown passes? What do you think? Are we going to go 1 or 2 in this game?
Yeah, they probably set it at the 1.5. And as much as, we keep saying we want this to be a running team, I want to see Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon do a lot of running, and I hope the weather-wise they do that. But we get to show our shiny new rookie package as Romeo Doubs is projected to be on the field Monday night as well. And now you put Doubs and Watson out there together. This is the matchup that I think since the preseason that we've wanted to happen, and injury has prevented it from happening to get them both out there. You also talk about the bye, Jeff, coming out of this after the bye and looking at injuries and players missing. So Cooper Kupp isn't going to be running all over the field. You talk about that defense. Von Miller has left LA. There's a lot of missing pieces in that Rams championship team. Right now, Bakhtiari is still questionable because of that the appendectomy that he had last week. Doubs technically listed as questionable, but we do expect to see him on the field. And then the two big outs, that we have out there in Rashawn Gary and Eric Stokes. I think, relatively speaking, this is a healthy Packers squad, again, going into this last 4-game stretch.
I will be at the game on Monday, flying in on Sunday night, and looking forward to doing some tailgating, looking forward to go over to Lot 9, as we always will. I'm looking forward to seeing some of our other friends in Packers podcast land as well, and absolutely looking forward to a Packers victory.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be tailgating no matter what the weather, even though it's a Monday night game. The parking lot's going to open up 3:15. So we'll talk about tailgating in a little bit, but it is a Monday night matchup. The legend of Monday Night Football. There's always been something, Neil, different about that night game. The lights being on, the electricity in the stadium, it just feels different. And Monday Night Football, the phenomenon that has been on ABC since 1970, leads us to our bedtime story. Jeff?
This is how I'd go south. The time, it's 1970. And as you can see, this beautiful picture of myself, Dandy Don, and Frank Gifford. All right, I'll make that stop.
Nice.
So, Packers and Monday Night Football. Well, back when Monday Night Football started, as you mentioned, in 1970, this wasn't real popular with the Packers because they weren't very good. So Monday Night Football basically rewarded and showcased the best talent. So again, when they only had 3 stations to watch, this was must-see TV, right? This was the showcase of football, the best that they had to offer. There was no such thing as a Sunday night game. There was, the 3:00 game, but if you were on Monday Night Football, you were good. You had arrived. One of the major hangups, as I've learned, other than the Packers not being very good in the 70s, was the fact that the lights at Lambeau Field were substandard for Monday Night Football telecast. So the Packers didn't have a home game on Monday Night Football for 9 years. So finally they replaced the lights, and lo and behold, then that was deemed that, yes, we can have a Monday Night Football home game. So the first Packer Monday night home game was October 1st, 1979. And in this game, the Packers showed up. They actually upset a heavily favored New England Patriots team. These new lights not only illuminated the stadium and for the new color TV, but they also illuminated the Packers. Again, it was pretty lean these first number of years. So the Packers appeared. So again, with starting the first season in 1970, the Packers appeared 18 times on Monday Night Football from 1970 to 1986. Okay, so they were not what I would call regulars.
Right. And that was it. And that was a time when, you had a maximum of 3 games on Monday Night Football. So like the best teams would show up 3 times on Monday Night Football.
Yep.
And the Packers, you got the schedule every year and you're hoping, well, maybe the Packers are going to get 1 game on Monday Night Football.
Yeah. Through that whole 3 home games and 15 road games.
Oh.
Well, so that even got worse, right? So then from 1987 and 1992, no appearances on Monday Night Football. Like, none. I mean, like, just nope, not even gonna bother. You suck. No Monday Night Football for you. But then a funny thing happened. From 1993 to 1999, the Packers had 15 appearances.
Wow.
Many of those were home games. So, success begets Monday Night Football appearances.
Puts you in the spotlight.
It absolutely does, John. So September 9th, 1996 was the first Monday night home game in 10 years for Green Bay. They beat Philly handily 39-13. Then they got good, right, as we know. So since 2010, the Packers have had 15 appearances. So they've scaled down. You don't see a team typically 3 times. So in 2019, the Packers did make 2 Monday night appearances. But since 2010, in 13 appearances, the Packers are 9-4, and they're right now riding a 5-game Monday night win streak. Couple interesting pieces of trivia with Monday night's appearance. It'll be the Packers' 30th consecutive season on Monday Night Football. That is the NFL's longest streak. So after like being, not much, nothing, then now they're 30 years in a row. There's also some we talked about the Washington game, of course, on Monday night that Neil and I were both at, but the Packers do hold a very important record. So Brett Favre and Robert Brooks own the Monday Night Football record for longest pass completion, 99 yards at Chicago on September 11th, 1995. That's also a Packers franchise record, and it ties the NFL record as well. One thing I didn't mention, the overall record. So the Packers overall on Monday night are 36, 32, and 1. So the tie was in the early 70s. Otherwise, like I said, as of late, they've had a good streak. Other interesting note, the Packers on Monday night have played a lot of teams, but there are 5 that they've never played on Monday night throughout this whole. And not surprisingly, they are mostly AFC teams: Arizona, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Houston. So again, with this 5-game win streak, hopefully they can make it 6 on Monday night under the lights.
We certainly spent a lot of time talking about, like you said, that Washington game, and you guys were both there. But Neil, that 79 game, do you remember? I absolutely do not remember the Monday Night Football game in 79. Do you?
Well, 1979, right? We're 9 years old, and so we probably had to go to bed. I always remember.
I think by halftime,
Monday Night Football was a spectacle again. So for me, the real trick on Monday Night Football was to figure out how I was going to be able to follow the game while sitting in my bed, and maybe I can crack the door open a little, and my parents won't notice. And but yeah, there was always some sort of trick as far as trying to get as much of the Monday Night Football game as we possibly could.
See, now the layout of your house made it trickier for you to come from the bedroom. You have to walk towards the people watching the TV. In my house, you could sneak down that hallway and into the kitchen, and you could catch an angle from the stove and see the TV. And you had to be real quiet because there was a soft spot on the hallway floor. And
it squeaked.
You had to get around.
I had the same issue.
And if you made any noise, you hear Dad moving his chair or something, you had to quick rustle down the hallway and slide back into bed, hoping you didn't get caught. So, and my folks who listen to the show, they're getting a chuckle out of that because they know that my brother and I did that quite often, watching Monday Night Football from the kitchen, hoping not to be noticed. Yeah, but that 79 game, I don't remember. The one I do remember, Jeff, you mentioned the Bears, the Halloween game in 1994
Yeah.
was in the throwback jerseys was a great game as well. I was living in Colorado at the time and found a Packer fan there and we watched the game on his big screen TV on that one.
Yeah, then there's also the famous Al Michaels call against the
Yep.
Vikings on a rainy Monday night. He did what?
Oh,
When
yeah.
Antonio Freeman, it bounced off everything but the ground, and he picked up, and the Vikings cornerback was doing his little celebration, and Antonio Freeman got his ass up and scored in overtime.
I wasn't at that game, but I talked to some people who were, and there was a ridiculous amount of rain that night. Even with rubber rain gear on, they were still wet
Soaked.
underneath. It was just unreal how much it rained that night.
As of late, they've been good. Once they surpassed the 70s and the 80s, kind of they joined the club, as it were, of popular teams, of good teams, and they've had a fair amount of success. So obviously, in the picture that you see there, Howard Cosell,
Classic.
it was must see TV.
Must listen to TV if you were a 9-year-old or 8-year-old.
Exactly, must listen to TV from afar. But I know famously, John, you're a big Beatles fan. But when Howard Cosell, literally the nation found out about John Lennon on Monday Night Football.
And they were friends. Cosell and Lennon were friends. They had a
because they both lived in New York, right? I mean, they were both.
And that and Cosell handled it with class. The news came out, and he said, "Absolutely, I'm going to mention this."
Yeah, no, he felt it was it was important news, and they had literally the nation's attention at that point. So, for say what you will about Howard Cosell, he was a very polarizing figure, but his legacy still lives on.
And you did a great impersonation, Jeff. So that's going to make you the impersonation guy on the podcast now. You just have to work on getting an evil Jack in your repertoire. and we're going to go forward with some more bits.
You know what? I'll defer to Scott on that one. He could be evil Jack. I'll work on Howard Cosell some more.
Perfect.
And maybe one of you can, be Dandy Don and sing, the party's over.
Sure. I'll let Neil likes to sing. I'll let him do that one. So we're looking forward to Monday Night Football. Certainly, as we said, tailgating is open at Lambeau Field at the parking lots. The Lot 9 party is going to be going on as well. Wear some extra layers, bring your hand warmers, and be ready for a chilly night on Monday night. With that, you guys, any final thoughts?
I'm looking forward to a football game on Saturday. So we talked about the Rice University Owls and their prowess in football in the 40s and 50s. Rice University is back in a bowl game in the year 2022. They are playing in the Lending Tree Bowl against Southern Mississippi. I will note the Rice Owls went in with a 5-7 record. You're supposed to have a winning record in order to make a bowl game, but there are 41 bowl games. And so they had to have a team with 5-7. And you know what the tiebreaker is for teams that are below 6 wins?
Smart kids.
It's called the academic progress rate. Essentially, whose student athletes are performing the best, they end up being the team that gets the tiebreaker. And so Rice is in the Lending Tree Bowl because of their superior academic progress rate. So go Owls.
Go Owls.
All right. All I've got to say is I will not be in Green Bay. So I wish you hardy folk all warm thoughts. And hopefully the Packers will give you a lot to cheer about. You will have the proverbial thumping of clapping so that there's no, because everybody will have their gloves on and be, dressed. Neil, if you want to take off your shirt and be one of those guys, maybe you'll show up on national TV.
I believe in as many layers as humanly possible when it's cold. So.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic. We'll see if my reverse jinx works this time. And if it doesn't, I think their season is doomed, and we'll probably see Jordan Love. But I think they will be prepared. I think they will come out and they will start their run.
And I know our astute viewers and listeners are going to say, "Hey, John, when you were talking about the 3 head coaches of the 50s between Lambeau and Lombardi, you failed to mention Hugh DeVore. Hugh DeVore, at the end of the 53 season, Gene Ronzani left Green Bay a little bit early, and Scooter McLean and Hugh DeVore were co-coaches for 2 games at the end of that 1953 season. They were interim coaches only. So in the Packer Media Guide, Hugh DeVore is not considered in the list of Packers head coaches, and Scooter McLean's tenure doesn't officially begin until 1958 because he was a interim coach for those 2 games. All right. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe, leave a comment, tell me that I missed Hugh DeVore if you want to or not, or any other piece of trivia that we missed, throw it out there on the YouTube comments. You can always find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word, Green Bay Chat. And make sure for Monday you are following us. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. We're going to be getting our stories out there, Neil, because it is game day on Monday, and also on Facebook at the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat. All right, everybody, may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.